So funny enough, I did not plan this, but I basically have the perfect circumstances to film today's video in, like the topic for this video, because both of my kids are home on a snow day unexpectedly, and my husband is currently snow blowing the driveway. So I have added all possible distractions that I could muster up inadvertently. So apologies if you hear any of those things in the background. Was not planned. I guess I'll start by introducing myself. This is a little bit different of a topic than I normally cover, so just in case you're finding me for the first time, my name is Steph. I am a small business owner. I make handmade soap, candles, bath salts, lip balms, that kind of stuff. Normally I'm making videos talking about like the behind the scenes of my business, and this is included in that. Obviously, this is a part of running the business, having ADHD. But also this is going to be mostly a video just about like managing ADHD as someone who found out very recently that they have it, as someone who has like no external structure to my day really, except for the fact that like I have to drop my kids off at a certain time and pick them up at a certain time. Everything else I have to manage myself. And all of those things paired with ADHD can be extra tricky, but I just wanted to share what little I have learned. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm also not a medical professional, so none of this is medical advice, but I thought maybe it would be helpful to give any sort of tips or insights that I can about my experience. Probably the best place to start is just how I got diagnosed with ADHD. I, like pretty much everybody else, was home in 2020 for an extended period of time. And I have two very small kids. Like when the pandemic started, my son was 8 months old and my daughter was 2. So it was, yeah, my husband was working full time and didn't have a lot of flexibility with work to parent the kids during the day. So it was a total sort of upheaval to what I had hoped for at this time. I had never even considered that I might have ADHD previous to this, because all of the like reasons that women find out later in life that they have it, like I was a really good student, I got good grades, I didn't have trouble sitting in my desk all day at school. All of the things that we think as like are like typical ADHD symptoms, I wasn't showing any of them. So I'm not all surprised that like no one in my life thought that I might have it. The only real like symptoms I think that were like sort of obvious was getting to college. I had 5 different majors in college, which again, like now that I look back at it, it's like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. But I just like couldn't nail something down. As soon as it was up to me what I was going to learn, it was like, oh, well, I'm interested in everything. How do I pick something? With the beginning of the pandemic, it was the same sort of thing where like all of these external structures of organization that like forced me to follow certain timelines or get things done in a certain way. Even just the fact that like I only really clean our house when we're about to have company over. Like that disappeared. We weren't having company over for a very long time. So all of the things I had fallen back on to like pump up my adrenaline of like procrastinating, it all disappeared. And so that was part of it. And then also really finding out via TikTok that emotional dysregulation was also a symptom. And I realized like I had such rage. Like, unfortunately, that's the emotion that like it's most clear to me I couldn't regulate. And that's really difficult when you have small kids. Like, I was just like feeling this like intense fire of rage. And I didn't want to. Like, I was like, I don't want to be this person. This doesn't feel like me. I don't know, I've never had this much trouble like managing personal relationships. I don't know. It felt very out of control. And um, because I had the time to sort of learn more about it, all of these things like hobby switching, that was a big one for me. I have tried so many different careers. Like the trouble I had with like picking a major in college really translated to my professional life as an adult. I could not figure out what career I wanted to go into. I couldn't stay at a job for very long because once the like newness and excitement of a new workplace wore off, I was like, I hate it. I physically can't sit in this chair and come to work every day. And I chalked all of this up to personal failings. Like I just assumed I'm lazy, I'm too much of a dreamer, like I'm not practical enough. These were all things that I just blamed myself for and kept thinking like, oh, well, it's your fault. Like read more self-help books, figure out how to stop being you. So of course, like learning that this might just be like a brain setting was a huge relief. And there's a specialist here, and I'm in Milwaukee. So like here just outside of Milwaukee, there's a doctor who sort of specializes in adult ADHD, and he evaluated me and was like, oh, yep, you have it. And I also like in the test for ADHD, I not only scored high for like the sort of typical symptoms of ADHD, I scored high for something that he called inhibition, which is basically like my prioritization of being perceived as like well behaved, not a troublemaker, which is that's not at all surprising either. But he said that like people who score high with that also are usually not diagnosed as children because like their desire to be thought of as like a good kid masks all of the other like ADHD things. Like it fueled me to get my homework done and all that sort of stuff. But even as a kid, now I look back, I preferred to do math homework in front of the television. Like I wanted noise in the background so that I could get it done. And like that sounds crazy, but like I can't study in a quiet library. I needed to be in a coffee shop in college. Like I needed noise and background stuff going on so that I could focus. And again, it like all makes sense now. But for the longest time, I just thought I was a freak. I'm like laughing about it, but it's actually really sad. So if you're in the same situation, I'm hoping that you can go easy on yourself. Anyway, once I got diagnosed, the first step sort of was like trying different medications to see if I could, especially like the emotional regulation. That was the thing I was most concerned about. It's like, I'm taking care of these kids every day. I would like to stop blowing up at them at things that I know in my mind are not that big of a deal. I just feel so out of control. So I really wanted that because when I got diagnosed, I did not have my business. So it wasn't so much that like I was concerned about work performance or, any of the other sort of things that I think might fuel people to get medication. I really just like needed to stop feeling like I was getting to the end of every day just like a complete mess, like a complete emotional disaster. And so I tried a bunch of different medications. Unfortunately, I'm very sensitive to medication, and something would like work well for the first few days, and then I would eventually like my anxiety would get really high. So that's the same reason why I don't drink caffeine. Like I'm sensitive to caffeine, so certainly any stimulants used to medicate ADHD, it's sort of the same thing. And so I currently am not on any medication. It's not because I'm against medication. If you have ADHD and you found a medication that works for you, that's amazing. I'm very envious. I think that's so great. But right now, I felt like the sort of like back and forth of trying something new and like I just it became its own overwhelming sort of thing. And I was like, look, I've been managing this without medication inadvertently for almost 3 decades. So currently, I don't use medication, and I am trying to work more on sort of like hacks and environmental tricks to allow myself to like be as productive as possible, and also just like giving myself a little bit of grace considering the fact that I have this. So I also think it's helpful to note that what I do now with my business, this isn't the first business I've had, certainly not the first job I've had, but I notice now that one of the things that's great about what I do is that it really plays to my strengths. it has the right mix of new challenges or new sort of like creative expression and the fallback of like things that I feel confident in doing. So like it's not that everything is like new and overwhelming. There are things that I do in this business that I can sort of like knock out and feel a sense of accomplishment around because they're like second nature. But then there's also enough like new things, even just like picking new fragrances every season, that's exciting for me. And so it's like I have to realize like what my brain needs from my job in order to stay engaged, stay motivated, and keep going in a way that like doesn't feel like pulling teeth. That being said, I also go through a lot of periods where I have no motivation at all. Like honestly, the whole month of January, I felt like I couldn't force myself to do anything. And I know I'm not alone in that. I talked to just like my friends and other people. I feel like a lot of people are experiencing that. I don't know what it was about this past holiday season, but it felt like I had all these things I needed to do and I just couldn't do any of them. And it was a little bit scary because obviously like if I'm not doing stuff, I'm not making money, like very dependent. I'm not in like one of those jobs where you can sort of like fake busy work and still get your paycheck every couple weeks. Like I need to be making more product and promoting product and doing all of that. And so I sort of went through like a little bit of a panic about like, oh God, have I lost interest in this business? Am I about to like dump this the way I've dumped so many other things? But no, that's not what happened. I'm feeling much better now. But I think that's one of the main things that I would advise as like my biggest tip doing anything with ADHD, but especially running a business, is just like giving yourself more of a pass during those times where like you just feel burnt out. And they talk a lot about, and I've read a little bit about like the burnout cycle with people with ADHD, like everything is new and shiny and so you commit yourself to like a bunch of stuff, whether that's commitments to outside things like events or new accounts or whatever it is, collaborations, or if it's just internal commitments like, oh, I'm gonna do this and this. Like I really believed that I was gonna like post a TikTok every single day starting in 2023. Like I had, like committed myself to that in my mind. It's like who do you think you were talking about there? Like you've never been able to do that. You think you're just gonna like flip the calendar over and all of a sudden you're producing content every single day? No. But I think that that is where I was at, is like I had all of these exciting ideas for the new year, but like didn't have the motivation to do any of them because I was burnt out from a busy holiday season and I had not worked in enough downtime to like recover from that. I think one of the main things I would say is like finding ways to work downtime into your day, every week, every like quarter. Like what are those sorts of pockets of time where you're just giving yourself the pass to like do nothing? And sometimes I'll be like at home at night, like after the kids are in bed, and just like scrolling through social media. And I used to really beat myself up about that. And I realized that like it's not productive to be mean to yourself about needing a break. And a lot of times when we're scrolling on social media, it's because we need a break. And you might think like, well, I was on social media for 2 hours today. Like you might have needed 2 hours of rest. Like don't assume that the recovery you need is quicker than it's actually going to be. That's a huge downfall of mine too. Thinking that like, well, I'll take a week off after the holiday season, which for me as like a product-based business owner is very taxing. A week, not enough recovery time. It's just not. And it's like, yeah, I'm doing like small things here and there, but I was unrealistic about my expectations for how much space I needed and like ability to sort of like clear out the brain fog. And I paid for that by like just prolonging the burnout. That's all that's going to happen. You can't like work your way out of burnout. That's sort of the problem. And that's what I was trying to do. So these past few weeks, realizing that and sort of shifting gears, it makes work a lot more fun when I know that if I hit a wall at whatever point during the day, I'm done. Like I gotta stop. I know what it feels like in my brain to feel like I can't do anything else today. And I had this feeling when I had office jobs too. And sometimes you don't have that flexibility, and I get that. And you might have to continue working anyway, but like even I think acknowledging to yourself that you're feeling that sort of like wall and thinking, okay, what's a way that I can sort of like treat myself when I get home from work tonight? Or like, what can I do to honor the fact that I felt burnt out today when I am off of work? Obviously, again, I don't have as much experience with that because I'm currently my own boss, but I think it's a very valuable approach to just like be kinder to what your body is trying to tell you and listen. It's gonna make sense in the long run because ultimately you won't be like I said, prolonging this burnout recovery. Along those same lines, when I know that I'm gonna hit a wall at some point every day, which I do pretty much, I use that information to prioritize my tasks. So there are some tasks that if I get to a point during the day where it's like, I'm done, it's fine that they get pushed off to another day. But there's other tasks that it's like, no, this has to happen today. You have to make this soap today because that's secure for however long. And knowing that, that is how I sort of like prioritize what I start working on. And so it is really hard for me to do production in the afternoon. I just know that about myself, that once lunch has come, anything that's like physical work, it's really hard for me to do. As much as I love making the products that I make, it's not very creative. The actual production of the stuff that I make is not creative. It's very routine, regimented, formulaic. And so it's very satisfying to get it done, but the resistance I have towards doing it comes so much easier than like something that's like sort of fun, creative, like making a mood board for the next collection. Like that sort of stuff I can kind of do any time of day because I like doing it, and it like fuels the like dopamine that I get from doing creative work. But the production aspects where it's like, here's the exact measurements you have to follow, like you're not reinventing the wheel here, just do this thing that you've done a bunch of times, that has to happen in the morning for me, or it's probably not getting done. And that's also like a very helpful thing to recognize as a business owner, is laying out my calendar in a way that sets me up for success with knowing that dynamic. Like, what are the tasks that you will feel the most resistance towards? And I have to do those during my most productive time. Like maybe you're an evening, I'm not an evening person at all. My ideal bedtime is basically 8:30. But if you're a night person, like maybe it's going to be the opposite for you. It's like you need something like light, easy, like fun in the morning, and then you like really get to work late at night. Good for you. I'll be asleep. But that was a really important thing for me to figure out. When it comes to deciding what's on my task list for any given day, I also have to have one place where all of my to-dos tasks live. I love a notebook. I love a new notebook. I like writing things all over, but if I'm being honest with myself, there has to be one calendar and one task list. And whether that's a written task list or digital one, that's up to you. I prefer digital because I think of things in all different scenarios, like things that I need to get done. Sometimes I think of them while I'm waiting to pick up my daughter from school. Sometimes I think of them like first thing in the morning. And the only thing that's always with me is my phone. I don't love admitting that, but it's true. At this point, I have to work with what I have to work with. And so for me, it's a digital, very simple running task list. Honestly, I think you could just like use your notes app for this, just like somewhere where all of it can live. And that's what I pull from when I'm making my daily task list. I know that there's some advice out there that like you should limit your tasks to 3 tasks a day. And it's like, that's not realistic for me. Like I'm wearing every single hat in this business. I always have more than 3 things to do every day. And if I only did 3 things a day, I would be very behind and that would cause me a lot of anxiety. But I do try and look at the list and be very realistic about like what really needs to happen today. Because the more manageable I can keep that to-do list, the smaller I can keep it, the less overwhelmed I get. When I'm organizing what needs to happen first, like I said, sometimes it's like the thing that has to happen today, because also I need to organize based on like what's causing me the most anxiety. I know that that's going to be different for everybody. So I know that's not very specific advice, but sometimes my first task of the day needs to be the thing that I can't stop worrying about getting done. So maybe that's sending an email. Like maybe it's not like the most time sensitive thing, but I keep worrying that if I don't respond to it soon, I'm going to forget about it or something. Then that has to be my first one. That's a lot of like how I measure what order things go in, is like what's taking up the most like mental bandwidth for me, and then I try and like get that taken care of, and I always feel so much better. I then organize my tasks for the day into sprints. Traditionally, the way that I learned about sprints is like 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes break, and then you just sort of like keep doing that, I guess, until you get sick of working. But I have realized that I can't be quite as rigid with that time, because as a business owner, like I don't, things are going to take such different ranges of time. And what I really want is to focus my sprints on one specific task and then give myself a reward after every task. So maybe the first sprint is writing an email. And it's like, that's not going to take me 25 minutes. So whenever I get done, maybe it only takes me 5 minutes, maybe it takes me 10. I don't know. It depends on how much I'm overthinking the email. But however long it takes me, I give myself a break as soon as it's done. I cross it off. I take like, sometimes I take 5 minute breaks, sometimes I take a 10-minute break. And for me, the trick with the breaks is that I have to do something during the breaks that I'm really excited about, that I only let myself do during the break. So this is gonna sound dorky, but if I have like a book I'm really excited to read, I read on my Kindle app on my phone. It's like very easy for me to access it on a break from work. Then that's a really good motivation for me. I know that that's, you're probably rolling your eyes at me right now, but maybe it's like a TV series that you love, and like as if you don't mind watching it in 10-minute increments, 5-10 minute increments, that's up to you. Maybe you just like want to go on TikTok for 5 minutes, totally fine too. That's what a lot of my breaks consist of also. But the fact that like something that's like really fun is coming up for you at the end of the task, every task, I think helps a lot. And again, like it needs to be a small reward because you've got to get back to the next thing. Like set a timer on your phone. That's crucial for me, especially if I'm going to go on TikTok. Set a timer for the 5 or 10 minutes. And as soon as it goes off, you're on to the next task. Some tasks are just going to take as long as they're going to take. Like I'm not going to set a 25-minute timer to make a batch of soap, because making a batch of soap takes as long as it's going to take. Like that thing has defined its own time. But there are some tasks where I'm just going to set a 25-minute timer. Like maybe I'm not sending emails, I'm trying to clean up my email inbox. And for something like that, that could go on forever, I do set a timer for. So I give myself 25 minutes to clean up my email inbox. I take note of like how many emails I had when I started and how many I had at the end of the 25 minutes. Cause like anything you can do to just like charge yourself up about what great work you're doing and how hard you're working, to me like makes a big difference. That's another way that I sort of frame my tasks. And that motivation of the reward might be all the motivation you need. Motivation is one of the trickiest parts with ADHD. I feel resistance so heavily around a lot of different things. And usually I need some sort of outside force to encourage me to get something done. Like I said, I don't clean this house unless we're having people over. I mean, like, really clean it. I pick up, but like, it's not getting cleaned unless someone else is gonna see it. But that's hard to do when you're the only person in your business. Some things are easier for me because, like, if I have a wholesale order, obviously somebody has paid me and is waiting for that. So that is easy to motivate myself to do because that that part of me that like gets anxious about fulfilling something, I can do it. But the other stuff, the motivation, it really comes and goes. And I think in addition to finding ways to sort of hack your motivation, you also really have to listen to what it's telling you. And that is something I'm working on. Like, if I continue to put off a task, like every day I'm skipping over it, or I'm thinking like, it gets to a point where it's like, do I have to do this? Like, is this something that I have decided I should do because everybody else is doing it, or because I want to look a certain way, or whatever? Or is this something that like really needs to happen? Like, okay, obviously I have resistance to doing my taxes, but you have to do your taxes. But there was a thing that I kept putting off because it was super overwhelming and I wanted it to be perfect. And I am very perfectionist around those things. And I talked to my therapist about it and sort of came to the conclusion that it's like, I actually don't have to do that. Like, I am feeling resistance towards this because it is something that I don't need to do. And I have made this like mountain out of it. And so I challenged myself to do a very like minor version of it, and it was totally fine. Like, it did not affect my business the way I thought it would. Like, I was so worried that if I didn't do this thing I would like miss out on orders. That didn't happen. So often we have to test these expectations and like challenge ourselves to say like, is this actually going to be as big of a deal as I think it's going to be? Like, is this actually going to cause the problem that I think it's going to cause? Or is this like, oh, something that my brain has allowed me to obsess about as a distraction from something else? Or maybe that's just me, but that definitely happens to me a lot. Well, not surprisingly, this video is getting really long, so I'm gonna try and wrap it up. It's funny, like when I'm filming these, I have no idea if they're gonna come together in any sort of coherent way until I edit it. So apologies if you're watching this and thinking, all you can think is like, wow, yeah, she clearly has ADHD. I think the best place to close out is to talk about the sort of positives of ADHD. Because initially, when I was diagnosed, I felt a huge sense of relief because I felt like there was finally like an explanation for all these things I'd given myself a hard time about. But then after that, I don't know, I just like sort of got bummed out, to put it simply, about what feels like an insurmountable obstacle towards like getting things done or like being an organized, like motivated person. I just felt like, oh, great, this means that I'll never be able to do this, especially when I couldn't like find a medication that worked well for me. But the more I think about it, and the more we're seeing how many people are getting diagnosed with ADHD, how many like things that we maybe thought of as like character traits are really symptoms of this. What I sort of feel like now is that being someone with ADHD and someone without ADHD is a little bit like being an introvert and an extrovert. It's sort of just two ends of a spectrum of how you approach the world, how you approach work, and the way that we experience burnout. I used to think of as laziness, and now honestly, I think of as like a reasonable reaction to the world we live in. Like, maybe more people are getting diagnosed with ADHD because it is harder and harder to go about our days without breaking down a little bit, and like whether that's just breaking down in your own head and like getting overwhelmed, or like of course we're overwhelmed. Like, have you looked outside? Have you watched the news? Like, I think being overwhelmed is actually like a very reasonable reaction to the lives that we live. So instead of like beating myself up about it or like wishing that I was different, it's the same thing as like an introvert. I am an introvert. Might not have thought that based off of how much I talk and put myself public facing, but I always like wished that I enjoyed being around people more and like didn't need so much alone time. And it's like, it's not my fault that that's part of who I am. And really, like, the most important thing is just knowing what you need and what you prefer, and working that into your life instead of trying to make yourself fit into a box that you just don't fit into. And once you sort of like make peace with the way that you're going to approach your tasks or your relationships or whatever it is, it makes it all a lot easier, because the like fighting against your nature is, I think, what causes so much of the like stress and anxiety. Whereas being able to accept it and work with it, I mean, there's so much of like the success of my business is because I have ADHD, and I like have done a deep dive on all these different topics that have ended up being a lot of really important information for what I do. And all these random jobs I had when I was trying to figure out what I wanted for a career, I use a lot of that stuff in my business. And so being the only person who does it all, I actually have a lot of information for how to get these things done. I don't think I would if I didn't have ADHD. So yeah, I mean, there's still a lot to work around, because society is not built for the way that our brains work, and you're gonna have to struggle a little bit to figure out what works for you. But hopefully this was at least the smallest bit helpful. Like I said, I feel like I've been rambling. I'll see if I can organize it into something organized. If you have any questions, I'd love to talk to you about this topic or others. Just feel free to comment below, and I will hopefully see you in the next video.